Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. I'm so glad you're with us wherever you are. If you're joining us on the television airwaves here in the Santa Barbara County area, we welcome you at TVSB. So grateful for the local folks and love the growing interest around here that we've seen in the program, and we're so grateful for that. And then so many of you join us on all these other platforms from all over the world, and we love that. And the podcast as well. Good Life Conversations is what you can search for any podcast platform. We're at X, we're on all the social media platforms, and of course you can subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. We've just been started kind of building that, and we're thrilled to welcome you there as well. The main website is goodlifetelevision.org, and you can read all about us and so many great people, so many great stories. I was reading something this weekend about, how we're the tellers of our stories. We're storytelling. We're not the author, which I think is a great distinction. But we are, telling our stories, and telling our stories can be such a powerful part of life. And everybody has a story. That's one of the things that's why people ask me, how long are you going to do this program? I say, well, God can intervene anytime he wants, but there's 7 billion people on the planet, so we're going to have plenty of material. We're never going to run out of stories, so many great ones. And so if you go to goodlifetelevision.org or these other platforms, you can see that there's people from all walks of life, mostly not famous. It's a lot of times the person you've never heard of that's just doing some amazing things. I love that. I love lifting up those stories, and it's such a great testimony. So we're grateful. We're grateful to be here. What we dwell on is important. And so dwelling on what is praiseworthy and noble and excellent is really who we are. So thank you for joining us on the ride. And we have another great story today. So grateful to welcome Jody Luke to the program. Jody, welcome.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, after this introduction, almost makes me teary. We can't have enough good. That's
That's
for sure,
right.
flooding the world right now. So thank you.
That's right. Well, I love what you all are doing. So Jody's executive director of Love Does, nonprofit founded by the great Bob Goff 20 years ago, that fights for human rights and cares for the vulnerable, works in education, works in so many different countries all over the world. It's a wonderful thing, and under Jody's leadership, the organization has really expanded its work to a dozen countries, I guess now, maybe more by now, but and also doing such great work domestically with teen moms, with refugees, the incarcerated. They do an amazing thing at a prison that we'll talk about, and so it's just an inspiring thing. I'll ask you about Bob Goff in a second, but I wanted to start with you and kind of how you got into this, and maybe start. I know I think you have 3 kids, if I read correctly, and married more than 20 years. Tell us a little bit about your life and kind of where you came from and your upbringing, and just take us back a little bit.
Well, it's really fun to be with you. And I think in part because I love to talk with friends who have similar backgrounds and are doing similar things in their life. Every season sort of looks different. And I know I came from a financial background, started at Price Waterhouse, and I think you came from a financial
Yeah.
background too. And how cool it is in different seasons to be able to serve and love our neighbor really well. And it looks different now. And I'm just so grateful for the start. But of course, I'm the executive director of Love Does now. I jumped in about, 10, 12 years ago, and was a fractional CFO, and love that numbers tell a story too, but really fun to bring my gifts and talents to this space as well. As you said, I'm married over 20 years to the real life anchor man. He's the morning anchor of NBC in San Diego, and so we get a lot of Stay Classy San Diego, and he also covers the Olympics. And so we're going to go this summer to our 8th Olympics in Paris. And this time I get to bring my 3 kids. So I have a junior at Baylor and a senior son in San Diego. And he is one of his schools that he's looking at is Westmont, which I think you are a graduate of.
Yeah.
Maybe seeing if he's going to go there. And then I have a freshman daughter. And so we are definitely busy. I feel like I sometimes have multiple lives. I'm living them all at the same time, but I wouldn't want it any other way. And I started in Kansas City. I love the Midwest. I love the people there and the character and just the hard work of what I learned there. And a Jayhawk, I love sports. And so it's fun to be passionate about so many different things. But I think what has been inspiring for me about Love Does, which, as you said, cares for the vulnerable, fights for human rights, and provides education in conflict zones, is that, what you do is kind of what you believe, and everything else is sort of just talk. And we're really aggressive on the doing part. And so we've been able to do some really beautiful things all over the world. And it's really been a privilege to be a part of it.
So great. Yeah, so great. That's a great point. I was thinking that thought this weekend. I was you know, everybody kind of asked the question, what do I do? And I think that maybe my most simple answer at this stage in my life would be the answer, something.
That's right.
Like, I think sometimes we want to overthink it. Like,
And we get
just do
paralyzed.
something. Yeah.
Yes, and
Right.
it's not the thought that counts. Often people will say that, "Oh, I
Right.
was thinking that." Well, I would have no way of knowing that. My husband would say that, like, "Oh, I thought you looked nice today." Well, how would I know?
Right.
Say
Right.
it. It's really not
Right.
the thought that counts, but it's that next step. And you mentioned Bob Goff. Bob Goff is the best-selling author of Love Does and Everybody Always. It's the name of our nonprofit, Love Does, and he started it 20 years ago in Uganda and India with schools and safe houses. But working with him is like drinking from a fire hose sometimes. He has so many big ideas, and it can be easy to get overwhelmed sometimes. Sometimes we'll say that we unleash maybe 10 ponies in the race, and maybe only 3 will cross the finish line, and it can feel overwhelming. Like, oh my gosh, there's so many things going on. But what I try to do is just do the next thing, right? I don't have to do the next 1,000 things. I just have to do the next thing. And then you keep doing that and doing that. And then you look back and you've made a lot of progress sometimes, or sometimes, at the door closed, and that's okay too.
Right.
But we keep going. We keep going.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. Yeah, what a guy, Bob Goff. I've written with him a little bit in the past, and he's an inspiration, outside the box, obviously guy who lives, with seems to me, I don't know him, but great freedom, and he's a doer. He's a doer of the word. And that's a fantastic thing. And and it is true, you throw up 100 things on the wall and you get 30 or 40 or 20, then, that's a lot. I think most people just want to throw up like 3, and then they don't get any of them and they just quit. Sometimes I think you have to go for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no risk, no reward. And again, I started with Price Waterhouse. And so business has sort of been in my DNA. And my dad would always say, the best times to start too sometimes are in your 20s because you don't have as much to lose. No
Right.
risk, no reward. And working on what Love Does is actually just like being a serial entrepreneur a little bit.
Right.
We're just starting if it's new schools or safe houses or prison programs or refugee programs or just like little businesses, and just getting them started over and over and over. And, you don't accomplish what you never try. And so we try a lot of things. And amazingly, a lot of it does cross the finish line. And I've always been amazed with that. A lot of what we do is abroad, and it doesn't take that many resources to really affect great change there.
Right.
And we found that over and over again. And of course have been working in that space for 20 years or so, so it's been really fulfilling.
That's so great. Yeah, it's so great. It's there's well, first of all, I wanted to say, you're a rare gift set of somebody who could be a fractional CFO to become the executive director and kind of pushing the ball,
Well,
helping to push
thanks,
the
I'll
ball down the
take
road.
that. I'll
Yeah,
take, but
that's
right back at you though,
that
because
well,
you're kind of the
yeah,
same,
yeah. Well, I wasn't a CFO, but yeah, thank you. That is a, special combination. That he's fortunate to have you in that.
Oh, thanks.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, there's for young people, I'm always on the side of moving out. My some people would say that, a bias towards action. I don't really, that sounds too fancy to me. I would rather just say do something. but I think that I saw something one time, that if you, number one, if you're looking for a reason to not take a risk, you'll always find it.
Yep.
And,
Absolutely.
you know, and many people will call you wise.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wise. That's wise. And sometimes I think, walking on water, uh, probably didn't seem like a wise thing. Like, I mean, if you're just looking at the numbers or this has never been done before. I think a lot of the great movements, great projects, great things that have happened in our world is because somebody decided to go for it, and that's one of the things I love about Bob, and it could be, whether it's having a parade on January 1st in your neighborhood or doing a project in Uganda. He's somebody who does things, and he's free enough to do things. Doesn't seem terribly afraid in that respect. What would you do? What is the thing I have on my desk over here? What would you do if you weren't afraid? It's an inspiring thing. So part of what I love about who you guys are and who Bob is and what the organization is that it's not just about actually what you guys are doing. It's about the inspiration for everybody else.
Mm.
That's the to talk about a force multiplier. That's the exciting thing, is for young people to read these books, and old people to read these books, and in between people to read these books, and to see the testimony and the example of, gosh, anything really with God is possible. So
A- Absolutely. And we actually have some Love Dozen action clubs that we're just starting on the college campuses, because you find that there can be a lot of discouragement around the world, but I actually find that a lot of young people really do want to be love in action. They want the next step and they just don't know what that is. And so to have some people come beside them, we have some clubs now that are forming on college campuses that are called Love Does in Action. And we'll put a little budget behind it and to say, hey, if we give you the seed money, how would it look to love your neighbor well? Is it just you'll just take that and use it to divide it up and give it away? Or do you use it as seed money to maybe do a run or to do something else to really multiply it, like you said? But let's let your creativity, your gifts and talents, and your youth come together and see what you can do. And there's some really remarkable things out there. That being said, I also just want to highlight all the education. And I know you all have been instrumental in that space for a long time. And so thank you for what you all have done. And we have too. We're in over 13 countries and we have schools in a lot of those countries. And when you were just talking about um, some of the force multiplier, I see education like that
yeah,
it translates not just into ABCs and numbers, but it translates it intangible that you can't quite quantify. I think of Somalia, where we have a girls leadership academy in Mogadishu, and we have the only girls leadership academy outside of Mogadishu. Somalia is a tough place to be, but we've connected with, she's a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and she's fearless. She's amazing. And I was talking to her recently, and we just launched this Girls Leadership Academy, and it's a building that has Love Does on the side. And she said, I love that you guys come in where some of the big agencies don't and build structures in Somalia, because it equals hope. Just building a structure, because other agencies like the UN have pulled out to say, well, what happens if violence takes it down? And her response is, well, what happens if it doesn't? Someone has to be the first person and the leader to be on the forefront to say, well, what happens if it doesn't and what can happen next? And so we've come beside there, and all those kids, education and that building now equals hope. And I think about Burkina Faso, where we are cornered on three sides by Boko Haram, and we've put a school in the middle of it. And education there equals you're not forgotten. We still see you and you're worth that. I think about Ukraine and Poland, and we have a school on the fourth floor of the refugee center in Warsaw, Poland, where all of these Ukrainian refugees have come through. And there, it's security. Education is not just learning, but it's also security. We have a kid there who wanted to keep his winter hat on all the time, and the teacher went over to him to say, you can take your hat off. And he said, uh, through a number of conversations. I don't think you understand, the Russian army came in the middle of the night and we had to flee our home. And then we had to go into the outskirts of our community and live there for several weeks before we found refuge and crossed over to Poland. And I don't feel safe. And maybe I might have to flee in the middle of the night here. And so I want to keep my hat on. And so over a number of weeks and months, now he takes his hat off. And that's really
Mm,
been through the school setting. I think about Mexico. We have a new asylum camp school that we're opening actually in April. It's right in Tijuana. It's for 1,800 families that are seeking asylum legally. They have to be screened and are there. And there was a building that wasn't being used. And we said, well, why don't we take it over and we'll put a Love Does school there. And there it recognizes that, hey, you're still worth something. The world has sort of overlooked you, but you're worth something. In all of these places, Nepal, it's like we have a school there for brick factory workers, migrant workers who come in and the kids have nowhere to go to school. And education isn't just for the higher class, education is for all classes. And so I love the education piece because it translates so much more than just education.
oh, absolutely. And tell us about the prison. I think it's San Quentin. Is that where you
Yes.
guys are?
Yes, we're in San Quentin. So some of our domestic programs, as you said, we've got a single mom home and we outreach to a bunch of single moms and refugee and a food truck. And then we go visit the San Quentin State Prison, which is, as you know, up a little bit of ways from you in Northern California, which is home to it's the oldest prison in California and was the largest condemned population. And it almost looks like Shawshank Redemption. You go in there and it's like this aura there. And Bob has been teaching a Dream Big class, and Love Does came beside it. We have some scholarships that we give to some of the inmates there. And what I've been so impressed with, I think it was in the same week I was in the DR for a women's resource center and visited prostitutes, and then I was in San Quentin visiting incarcerated, but was the power of second chances and
Yeah.
what that could do. Because some of those guys will never leave those prison walls, but yet they've got days still to live out. And, if faith is a value to you, it says all of your days still have value. And what does it look like to maybe serve the Lord or serve your neighbor, even if it's your incarcerated cellmate or your guard? What would that look at like to live out those days? And one of my most favorite stories there is we had a guy early on in one of our classes, and we asked, what was your big dream? And he was really annoyed at the beginning. And he said, my big dream really is to get out of prison. And then he started thinking about it and he said, well, he remembered his brother had been deaf growing up it was hard to communicate with him. And he had seen a few incarcerated guys who also were deaf on the yard. And it was very difficult to communicate with them because they needed state funding to have an interpreter. And when they didn't, no one could communicate with them. And so there would be some violence around that. And he thought, what if I got certified in sign language? And he did. And then he said, what if I teach a class at San Quentin to other incarcerated men who would like to be certified in sign language? And he did that. And I think it was a class of 30, there was a couple guards that came in and said, hey, could I take your class too? So we could communicate with those guys on the yard. And I
Mm.
think in some ways, there might be people on the other side of the wall that will never have a legacy like the one that he has given a couple of those guys. And so you don't have to change location sometimes to tell a new story and to have real impact. And we've seen that over and over again.
Oh, that's so great. I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
um, not forgetting the prisoners. I mean, that's one of those things I think sometimes that we just forget,
Let
that.
me say on that too, and that's a big deal for us because I think just like we've spoken before, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'd love to be involved," and can be really discouraging. And I think one of the most encouraging things is to get a fresh vision from God and what that looks like. And I think a lot of what we do at Love Does is informed by Matthew 25, which you alluded to, which is the hungry and the thirsty and the sick and the stranger. And don't forget those that are in prison. And
Yeah,
we have found that whenever you're in those spaces that, he says, when you do for them, you do for me. And there's
right.
really something special and powerful and inspiring that happens. And so if people are listening and don't know where to get involved, those are some great places to start. The hungry and
Yeah.
the thirsty and the sick and the stranger. And don't forget those that are in prison.
Yes. Yeah, and it's small things. The little things are the big things, and that's one of the interesting parts about scripture is it's oftentimes it's just down to the something that really everybody can do. The person, you don't need to build a school necessarily. If you're able to, that's great. But it's a cup of cold water. It's not forgetting the prisoner. It's maybe that's writing a letter, or there's so many things that can actually be done. And when you start to think that way, um, it changes your whole perspective on life in many regards. It's something more that happens inside of you when you're thinking about somebody else in these ways, that actually changes your perspective. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I think fear plays a big part in that. We take some people to the prison with us, and you can tell their countenance before and after, as they are walking in. Bob will often say fear is the thief of joy, but the fear keeps you from doing a lot of things. And those people have said, all right, I'm going to kind of overcome that. And they walk in, and then all of a sudden you're engaging in some conversation, and they walk out just being so encouraged.
Yeah.
And fear keeps you from doing it. And I think, not knowing what to do. But I think, as we've talked about, it doesn't have to be big. It really could be your neighbor across the street. It doesn't have to be a big, or it could be just paying it forward at Starbucks. Uh,
Right.
and,
Right.
and what an example that is to your kids. Gosh, if you've never done that, you should do that. It blows people's minds in the drive-through Starbucks line to go in. And I've been the recipient of that, where somebody has said, "Oh, the person in front of you just paid for your drink." And your kid goes, "What? Why? How?" And how cool. And then what is your natural response? What could I do now for the next person?
Right.
It's
Right.
contagious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What's it like to work with Bob?
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's There are no
Does he
words
ever
that
take the Red Sox hat off? Does he sleep in the hat?
it's he pretty much does. Yeah. That's what I love from Bob, though, is that you can expect a lot of things. You can expect it to be creative, just off the charts, fun. You can expect the unexpected. I'll give you an example. We have this primary and secondary school in northern Uganda, and he started it 15, 20 years ago. And it is at the birthplace of the Lord's Resistance Army, like the ground zero, where awful things happened. There was a 20-year civil war, and it was Joseph Kony, and there were child soldiers, and really just, if you could think about evil on earth, that was sort of happening. And he said, "This is where we're going to start a primary and secondary school," 15 years ago. And it has now become the jewel of the North. They get the highest test scores. It's really been remarkable. And so we said, what if we started a university right next door, which is like unthinkable in this area? And I was talking to him about, the X's and O's of that. And of course, Bob comes in and says, "Well, if we do a university, we would have to do a zoo next door." And I'm like, "Bob, it's a big enough thing just to do a university. Like, it's like a billion steps for that. Like, are we really going to think about a zoo?" But I love it because it's winsomeness, it's wonder. And I used to live in Chicago when I worked for Price Waterhouse. And I remember working with some inner city kids there, and they didn't ever see Lake Michigan. And it was about 15 minutes east. And I couldn't believe it, but they had not had the resources to just go to the lake. And the kids in northern Uganda are about 2 hours north of some really big, amazing game, giraffes and hippopotamus and elephant. But most of them have never seen it, just because they've never had the means to do it. And I love Bob's heart in that. And it was like, "Hey, we've already done a primary secondary school that has just knocked people's socks off. Now we're going to build a university, but we're also going to have this zoo that will really be giraffes next door, because we want these students to think that anything is possible." This will be the first time that they're going to see giraffes. So when they're studying to be the future leaders of this country, we want them to think so big, so huge. And winsomeness and wonder and creativity brings that, especially when you can couple it with some actual really practical resources like a university. So that's in process now.
I
And
love it.
of course, I wondered if he was really serious about it. And I walked in my office one day after a trip to Uganda, and there was like a 6 foot stuffed giraffe on my desk. I was like, he's serious.
We're building a zoo.
We're building a zoo. So it's going to be awesome. So that's what's like, and balloons. There's always balloons.
Yes, he loves his balloons.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, the impact. I mean, I've studied a little bit over the last year about Kenya,
Mm.
and just the demographically, the youth populations as a percentage of the population in some of these countries is pretty staggering in terms of I mean, and you can see that as, in some respects, some people see the negatives in that in terms of gross domestic product or whatever, but in terms of opportunity, the opportunity that I think exists in some of these places where there's a staggering percentage of young people um, to really make some long lasting generational kind of change is really off the chart, isn't it?
I love that you said that because I say that all of the time. It is, that's why we work in conflict zones. You have the biggest opportunity for change in conflict zones because so often in those conflict zones, the population of the country is really young. And so you can change a generation in a generation. And that's really what we're seeing in Uganda. You're seeing, we're seeing that we have this primary and secondary school. We've proven the concept. And so now let's build a university. There's a shortage of university seats because there's so many young people and there's been so much conflict previous, but now we're in a relatively stable period. And if you don't fill the vacuum, somebody else will. So now we have an opportunity to bring a character-based education in a really meaningful way to a very youthful country that has a real opportunity, like you said, to change generations. And we can help create what that change could look like. And it's really, really exciting. So I love that you see that too, because we do as well. And it gets us absolutely thrilled.
I love it. Well, yeah, I love it. Well, make sure you tell Bob that, he and I are destined to be good friends. Um, but he doesn't know that yet, but we need to make sure that he's aware of it.
I
You know,
think
I,
it's already happened.
I moved into a cul-de-sac in Dallas, Texas, next to President George W. Bush, and who I was a big fan of for a long
Mm,
time. And
hmm.
the first time he came over, I said, you and I have been very close friends for like 15 years. You just found out about it.
Yeah.
He said, and he laughed. So that's how I feel about Bob Goff. He's a hero for me.
Well, that's great. And I think he'd probably say the same. And he's a friend to all, and everybody feels like that. So I think that'll
Yeah.
be awesome when you guys get to reconnect, right?
Yeah,
Whenever that might happen.
I love that. So lovedoes.org, get involved if you want any of these projects. They're doing such amazing things. So I'd highly encourage you to reach out. But it's true, Jody, that the lighting a candle. I don't. The thing about that's what's so kind of fun about Bob is he's smiling and there's balloons everywhere because he's not a guy who's doesn't strike me as somebody who's spending a whole lot of his day cursing the darkness. He's really lighting a candle, and he's really encouraging other people to light candles. And I saw a teaching that they were somebody was saying, I forget who it was, but he was saying, in all my years walking into a room or turning on a switch, I've never seen the darkness swallow up the light.
Mm, yeah.
The light wins. And even if it's a spark here or a candle there, the light wins. And that's something to keep our eye on in a world that is increasingly difficult in many respects. And there's plenty of, again, you're looking for something negative, you'll find it. I mean, that's like, it's called the internet actually.
Yeah.
uh, but that's, we have to band together kind of as people who are
Yeah.
interested in the candle lighting business. And let's remember that the darkness is not one time in history, swallowed up light.
Well, where the darkness is darker, the light shines brighter, right?
Yes, right. That's
And I
right.
feel like it's almost like I'm dating myself, but it's that cartoon. Remember Wonder Twins activate? It was like form of, and you can almost, so I'm going to just,
Right. Right.
well,
God, perfect.
and we're on
Perfect.
it together.
Right.
And I love that you all are doing that on all these platforms too. And
Well,
so
thank
it's
you.
like a kindred spirit for sure.
Yeah, well, we're grateful for you, Jody. Congratulations on this role, and we're excited and we're with you. And again, encourage people to check out lovedoes.org. And we're grateful to meet you.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it. Keep
And
doing what you're
thanks,
doing.
thank you, and thank you all for joining us. Wonderful, what a wonderful time. We'll see you next time.